You might not know this, but technically, Guitar Pro is a DAW. It can only use MIDI. You cannot use any external plugins, but you can do some basic automation, EQ each track, and then export it into WAV or FLAC. Now, this might be a ridiculous case of use, but if you're writing a song with multiple people who don't have Guitar Pro, you can use these export settings to still collaborate. You can import MIDI by just going into File, Import, and then click on MIDI and choose your file here. I have one right here, and you can choose which ones you want, name the files right here, and even see an example what it will look like. Or you could just simply find it and drag it in. You get the same options, and then you hit import. As you can see, it plays back fine, has all the metadata you need, like the names, tempo, tunings. This was exported from Guitar Pro, so it will have those metadata files, but even if you're using a DAW, the same thing can apply. Also, if you just want to share a quick update to someone, you can export this as an MP3. Just make sure that you selected RSE and not the MIDI sounds by going into track and then clicking on RSE. This will make it so that when you go on file and export, you can select audio, and here you can change different types. I find MP3 to be the best because the file size is low and it's easier to share on any social platforms or Facebook, WhatsApp, iMessage, or what have you. You can select the quality and just hit export. You can select it where and then save. Now, there are free Guitar Pro alternatives like TuxGuitar, which you can use to view and edit tabs. Although with less flexibility than in Guitar Pro, you can get this on a Windows PC, Mac, Android, and even Linux. It's a simple tablature editing program, but it can read GP5 extensions by going into File and then export into GP5. Now, it won't export stuff like automations or track EQ, and it's gonna use the simplistic MIDI sounds instead of the RSE, but it still should be good enough to get the idea across, and if the other person has something like TuxGuitar even, they can edit it and add to it and then send it back, and you can export it back into Guitar Pro. And if you end up with a lot of GP5 files, you can do something that's called a Bach Convert, which means you can select loads of files, select different file types from GTP up to GPX, and it converts it all to the most current file extension that Guitar Pro 7 uses. It's also useful if you've just been using something like TuxGuitar or an older version of Guitar Pro, and you've recently updated to Guitar Pro 7 and want to update all the files you have on the computer to work best with Guitar Pro 7. But what if you're making an arrangement for a big band, orchestra, or a choir, and need printouts or just the visual aspect of the sheet music? You can export a PNG or a PDF by just going into File, Export, and then hitting either PNG or PDF. I'm going to do PDF in this case, and I'm going to hit Save. And here you can see the PDF itself. If you want to customize how this is going to look, you could just go into Song and then Style Sheet. You can change the borders and everything else about the pages, including the fonts, which I have another tutorial of how to do. But if you want to see more than one instrument at a time, you need to change the visibility of each track and switch to multi-track instead of just single track. And I can click on all of these and you can see I see more than one track at a time. If you want the tabs to include the traditional stems, just the tablature, or both, or even the slashes, or all three, you can change them in the track settings under musical notation. I usually go for the standard notation, but every once in a while, if it's for the drums or for something else, I might just have one or the other or multiple. Now, the last tip is really useful if you want to write MIDI drums, but don't want to mess about with those tedious and clunky looking MIDI editors that most DAW seems to have. Just write the drums in Guitar Pro and then export it as a MIDI. As you can see, writing the drums out like this just makes way more sense and just easier to write. Now, the only thing you have to make sure is that you solo the track, so it's the only MIDI that you're exporting. MIDI and then export. And now you can export the MIDI drums into your DAW of choice. In my case, it's Reaper. I can just drag it in, and it even asks if I want to import the tempo map. I'm going to say yeah, and here you go. It will also already use the drum sounds because it knows that this MIDI is supposed to be a drum and not a keyboard like most of them have it as standard. Now, I'm not going to play it now because I'm also using Reaper to record this audio, but I think it's useful to be able to write the drum tracks in a way you would write the sheet music and then export into the DAW and have it retain a lot of info, like the dynamics, tempo, and that it's a drum. So when you drag and drop it in your DAW, it will sound like a drum. So this will depend on your DAW, and what your settings are. There are some more exporting options, but these are the ones I actually find useful and actually end up using. If you have any questions, just leave a comment, and if you found this tutorial useful, leave a like and subscribe. Thanks!